technology is very fun to talk about disruption. It's not a lot of fun to be disrupted. I do think we'll have to pay special attention to the people being disrupted and their needs and desires and wants.
Vinod, I am so excited for this. I've been absolutely loving your Twitter content recently. And so first off, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Happy to do it. Always like talking to entrepreneurs.
That is so kind of you. But I want to start today on the kind of topic of the day, which is obviously AI, artificial intelligence. And Khosla and you have been one of the biggest proponents and conversationalists of the space in the last 10 years, really, as one of the first investors in OpenAI. And I just wanted to start with the question of, do you believe the recent hype in AI is due to technological breakthroughs and innovation, or is it the result of hype cycles keeping up with innovation from years ago?
A little bit of both. Let me give you a perspective, going back a long time. In 1982 at Sun, we adapted TCP/IP and the internet as our native network. We were the only ones. By 1996, it was clear that exponential growth was going to continue, and we invested in Juniper, which, by the way, was a 2,500x return, a $7 billion return for us on a $3 or $4 million investment. When the internet really took off, and I remember investing, meeting Mark Andreessen to invest in Netscape, the browser company, on a Saturday morning in Mountain View when it was 3 people. It really took off, but the exponential was clear much earlier. The reason I bring this up is I wrote my first blog on AI, Do We Need Doctors and Do We Need Teachers? A little tongue-in-cheek, but encapsulating the idea that expertise could be free in 2011, 2012. It was pretty controversial then, but it was a similar moment to when we had adapted the internet and TCP/IP in the 80s at Sun. And then when ChatGPT came out, it became like the browser moment for the internet. And it's now obvious to people the extreme capability that we've developed here and will continue to develop, and is progressing at a rate where even I can't keep up. But anytime there's a rich area for development, bubbles form. And I worry a little bit that that will happen here. There's obviously real technological progress, real expansion of the opportunity set for real building businesses, but also a lot of hype that follows, a sort of a rich area to mine. Sort of the gold rush phenomena. What I'm fundamentally optimistic about is when you look at bubbles. In the 1800s, 1830s, there was a bubble in England when you got the right to build a railroad between 2 towns. You could issue scripts almost immediately. The bubble did burst, but more railroad was built after the bubble burst than before. My point is, I think the progress of AI applications in utility for society will go on a steady pace based on technical capability and entrepreneurial interest in it, not what Wall Street or investors think about it. So I think investors are important because they fund these developments, but the investors cause bubbles. The reality is the underlying technology and its applications.
You mentioned there OpenAI and ChatGPT being the equivalent of the browser in terms of the consumerization and the access that it provides consumers. You tweeted before, the daylight between what we'll be able to do with AI and what we'll actually do with AI is human resistance. Can I ask, what did you mean by this human resistance, Vinod, and how does it show itself?
Well, there's 2 types of things. First, a genuine concern that AI will displace jobs, and what do we do with that? If I'm right, the level of job displacement over 20-25 years will be large. And we've dealt with that kind of job displacement before, but over multiple generations. For example, in agriculture, when it was 50% of all jobs in the US in 1900 and went to 4% by 1970. if the change is happening rapidly, then job displacement may cause us to have rules and regulations that slow down progress. Another example could be physicians resisting AI being able to do physician types of tasks. The AMA is a very good organization, but there is protection built in certain areas, whether it's in unions or physicians or pick your favorite expertise, media, where artists or production music producers may object to some of these. That's what I mean by human resistance, because people are being disrupted. Honestly, technology is very fun to talk about disruption. It's not a lot of fun to be disrupted. And so one has to be very considerate of the people being disrupted and accommodate them if we're going to make better progress. I do think we'll have to pay special attention to the people being disrupted and their needs and desires and wants.
I want to approach this from a very first principles interviewer style and ask very basic questions, so I hope that's okay. What should we be doing, do you think, for those that will be disrupted? As you said, it's fun for us at the forefront of innovation. If you're being disrupted, less so. What should we be doing and how should it be handled?
So let's start with the math. Let's say the next 50 years of GDP growth without AI and some of the newer technologies would be 2% a year. Per capita income may go from 70 or 75 wherever it is today, or 65, I forget the exact number, to about 175,000. If we change GDP growth to 4%, that per capita income would increase to 475,000 or so. My point is, we will have adequate resources, adequate abundance to share much more broadly. I wrote a blog in 2016 in Fortune magazine that said AI will cause, and this was 7 years ago, AI will cause great abundance, great GDP growth, great productivity growth, everything economists measure, and increasing income disparity. It was the first time in 2016 I wrote about needing some sort of universal basic income, which means redistribution of income in a much better way than we have today. The reason I gave you my calculations of the effect of changing GDP growth from 2% to 4% over 50 years is we will have enough to share. So my suggestion would be some large percentage of per capita income growth or GDP growth be reserved in a social security pool for universal basic income or something like that. There's many ways to redistribute, some more acceptable than others, but I think happiness in our society will be a function of equality, not just GDP growth. And I think we'll have to consider that. And AI will make that abundance possible. So I'm optimistic it can be done. Bill Gates has talked about a robot tax. There are multiple ways to approach this, but I think reducing the rate of increase and putting the excess into a pool for like a social fund would be the right approach. Because increments are much easier to share than somebody saying, well, let's increase taxes on everybody. I'm fine with tax increases personally. I do think we can afford to have a better tax system, more equitable tax system, but there are maybe better ways to do this and increase sharing of the benefits of these technologies through other mechanisms.
Do you think AI does more to harm or to help income inequality?
Well, AI is a tool for productivity growth. Capitalism does result in more inequality, almost always. Everybody's better off, but the income inequality increases. That tends to be what history has shown us. And AI will only accentuate that. And so sharing the benefits of AI in a different way will be important. I think it's not by constraining AI or not using AI to benefit society. It's by taking the product of these technologies and sharing it more equally. The increased abundance should be more equally shared.
I'm fascinated. Again, I said I loved your tweets. I really have loved them. One of them said, the choice is, do you let AI do the jobs or not? Some will, and some will be laggards. When you think back on that, who do you think will embrace it, and who do you think will be the laggards?
I worry that the Western political system and capitalism is by permission of democracy. So the Western political system will pay more importance to the short term, which is things like job displacement, while in China, you might get Tiananmen Square type tactics to adapt it and win economically as a country as opposed to each person being fairly treated.
I totally understand that as a concern. I think the hardest thing is political incentives, which is every politician is incentivized to remain in power, and actually encouraging job displacement will not help them in the next election. It might help the company economically in 20 years, but the incentive mechanism of politics doesn't align to the GDP and per capita growth over the long period.
Absolutely true, and if the change is slower, it'll be easier to accept than if it's super rapid. I'll give you an example. I'm pretty convinced instead of displacing physicians, and long time ago I wrote a blog called 20% Doctor Included. We could quadruple the number of interactions between a physician and patients. In fact, it's already true. In Australia, there's many more interactions with your primary care physician every year for the typical patient than we do in the US. So you could increase the level of service, increase the level of attention with AI taking excess of that. There's projected to be, under current course and speed, shortage of primary care physicians in this country. I think we can have an excess even when we increase the number of interactions by 5x, because AI can take 80% of that increased load. And that's a good example of how one can work cooperatively to improve the level of service in healthcare and primary care while not disrupting physicians.
Do you believe then that AI will be a competitor or a complement to the doctor? And do you believe doctors see it in the same way?
You know, I wrote about it probably 8 years ago. I wrote this paper, 20% Doctor Included. It's about a 100-page document. And I wrote about the human element of care being provided by doctors and the detailed expertise being provided by an AI. You can't expect your oncologist to be caring, talking about your cancer, and have read the 5,000 most recent articles on your cancer. They can't keep that knowledge in their head. So that's the kind of partnership that'll be possible. You know, you don't want a computer telling you have cancer. Yeah, you want a caring human being. I jokingly said to the dean of the Howard Medical School about 5 or 6 years ago, they ought to change their selection criteria for more empathy, more mirror neurons, and less IQ only, which is what it takes to get into Harvard Medical School. I said, take the model of the UCLA Film School and look at caring humans as criteria number 1 for admission to the MD program.
What other ways do you think AI will most significantly change healthcare and medicine in the next 10 years?
Well, for example, we can custom design proteins for particular purposes. I'm pretty excited that for a large number of genetic defects, and there's probably 6,000 or so diseases that are single mutation genetic diseases, we will be able to design with AI's help custom solutions, because we've essentially solved the protein folding problem. We can fully characterize the design and behavior of DNA, RNA, proteins, and that's all really, really exciting. So that'd be a huge impact on the pharmaceutical side not the expertise side of healthcare. Almost every area, whether in healthcare or in media, will be exciting.
Can I ask you, you mentioned before a brilliant thing, which is I've never seen innovation come from large institutions. And it's really applicable across medicine, across education, across music. But do you think in this next wave of innovation due to AI, that holds true? Or does AI actually allow incumbents or the dominant parties to just become stronger?
I believe innovation will be spread broadly in different areas. Now, large language models may or may not be constrained to the large platform companies. Right now, it appears that'll be the case. There'll be 2 or 3 major providers of large language models. But for example, we have an effort in symbolic logic to see if in 3 or 4 years it could change the equation of how you train these systems and the amount of data required and all those kinds of things. We have an effort at developing curriculum for AI instead of curriculum for humans. Almost everything AI is training on is designed for humans, not for machines. So there's a number of large innovations, and it's hard to tell today which ones will play out, work out, or be important in 3 or 4 years. So when we originally committed to OpenAI 4 or 5 years ago, it was very unclear where the world would lead and what the capabilities would be and when they would develop. It was clear to me that there was a reasonably high probability of pretty significant advancement at some point in time. Hard to say whether it would be 2022 or 2025, but that didn't bother us. The shape of the curve and the exponential really interested us. I think there's other approaches to AI. Josh Tenenbaum, for example, working a lot on probabilistic programming, others working on formal techniques like symbolic logic. Do they add to, replace, complement LLMs? I think all those are possible, and within LLMs, large innovations are possible. So I would say the future is not predictable, but it is discoverable. And what I'm really optimistic about is the best minds in the world are now working on this problem. And I think that's more a precursor of progress than any single thing like, hey, we suddenly have a new transformer-like paper, or attention is all you need, the famous paper. It's more about the talent working on it that makes me excited.
What do you think are the barriers that we need to overcome for AI to have the impact we all want it to have on healthcare?
Well, in healthcare and other areas, AI is doing some things really well, other things not so well. And I think that's where development needs to be rapid. For example, in healthcare specifically, guardrails is a very, very important issue. Safety is a very important issue. So a lot more attention has to be paid to those factors. Explainability is a huge issue. Those things will need to be developed by somebody applying AI broadly to, say, primary care or oncology, or pick your favorite area, cardiology. But all of those, I'm pretty convinced will happen in the next 5 years. And we'll see the capability develop to provide very, very low cost, much more frequent and accessible care. And accessible both accessible 24/7 and accessible at a very cheap price to every human being on the planet, I think.
Vinod, we've spoken about healthcare. You've written, we'll talk about education, but you've written extensively about both many years ago, ahead of time, seeing things before anyone else did. To what extent do you think about market timing when investing? Because I think it's Mark Andreessen's quote, there's no such thing as a bad idea, only a bad time. Do you think about market timing?
You think a little bit about it, but I mostly feel I'm not smart enough to predict it. In retrospect, you always feel dumb about some things and really smart about others. We invested in OpenAI and we invested in Commonwealth Fusion about the same time. And I'm really happy about both. But, both felt like longer-term bets than they've turned out to be. And progress has been more rapid, both in AI and in fusion. Very different areas than I would have expected. Suddenly, I feel smarter, maybe even overconfident about my predictions. Today I sit here and say, for example, the amount of compute power AI systems need, the expense of training. Could one have analog computing, and we are working on that, dramatically change that equation by 100x, both cost and power? And I think that's entirely not only possible, but likely. When's a little bit harder to predict, though we are taping out chips this year.
No, I have to ask, you mentioned fusion there and you mentioned Commonwealth. I thought it was fascinating when I thought about kind of the future of energy and when I was doing a lot of work prepping for this. Because you said before, forcing non-economic solutions is the wrong approach to climate. And solutions will need to be at what I call the Chindia price. My bet is on fusion and geothermal. I just wanted to break this down because I didn't understand some of it, if I'm honest, which is, why is forcing non-economic solutions the wrong approach first?
Well, energy generally is such a large-scale problem that there's no way, we will spend the money to scale it. It's great for the first 1%, 2%, 3% of the market, whether it's the electricity market with solar and wind, or the hydrogen market, or pick your favorite. I believe subsidies should be declining with scale. So they can be high when it's 1% of the market because the tax on the overall energy cost would be low. But they have to start scaling down, and no subsidy is being designed that way, where as it gets to 2% or 4% or 8% or 15% of a segment, whether it's hydrogen to replace natural gas and coal, or solar or fusion to replace electricity from coal, it has to scale down. If it's not, it's going to become too expensive. Do you get clean energy and no healthcare spending? What are you going to trade off? Those are the kinds of practical things at scale that matter. Having said that, look, early subsidies help get technologies developed when they're subscale, but by the time they're 5% of a market, they really shouldn't need subsidies at all. Also, practically, if you're a politician in India, you're not going to tell people they can't have clean water, but their kids will be better off because there will be a less warm climate. It's a very hard political trade-off to make. Coal consumption's been increasing in some of the developing parts of the world. You can't defy the laws of economic gravity at scale. You can do it in small startup sort of situations, but not at scale. And for it to be contributing positively to economic development in countries like India or China, it has to be competitive globally with other sources, or it won't be adapted. And this leads to a very important point in climate. We don't need incremental solutions. We need large breakthrough technologies will make these new technologies competitive at scale. So we can take small risks and have incremental decline in costs, but that doesn't solve the problem because it won't be broadly adapted. Or we can take larger risks and, if successful, really have solution. Fusion's that kind of thing. Deep geothermal, 400 or 500 degrees centigrade geothermal, would be that. Finding a new geothermal site incrementally doesn't really help. It's not scalable. It needs to be scalable by 100x more than exists today, at least. And so my interest in technologies that scale and are economic and don't defy the law of economic gravity when scaled. Aviation fuel is a very simple example. And while we are talking about it, these take a long time, so sometimes the venture community ignores them, but they're profitable. If I look across our portfolio, some of the investments we made more than 10 years ago are, there's a whole number of them. QuantumScape, Verdagy, LanzaTech, Impossible Foods, that are 5 to 10x multiples, though they took a longer time to get there. So Climate 1.0 was successful if one was patient and picked the right technologies. Things like fusion, new plant proteins. I'm very excited about new fertilizer production techniques, new steel production techniques. We are taking radically different approaches in cement, steel. Those are really, really exciting breakthroughs, and there's no question they will be cheaper than its fossil alternative. Already I can say the cement we are producing will be 70% less carbon, and our first plants will be operational this year, and cheaper than traditional Portland cement. And that's when things start to scale.
Can I ask you on fusion, what is at the core of the bullishness, and how does fusion bankrupt entire industries and destroy massive companies like you've said before?
There was one breakthrough that enabled fusion to happen, which was high-temperature superconductors. It wasn't possible to build a fusion reactor with a 20 Tesla magnet, which is what Commonwealth Fusion is doing. With that magnet, the size of the reactor scales to 1/Tesla to the power of 4. So if you quadruple the power of the magnet, which one can do with high-temperature superconductors, the reactor itself becomes 1/250th the size, so 250 times smaller. Because of that, you can now both be economic, but also experiment much more rapidly, build them much more rapidly. Commonwealth Fusion was able to build a 20 Tesla magnet for fusion and demonstrate it in 3.5 years. It has taken the large ITAR project with smaller magnets 25, 30 years to get to the same place, so 10x faster. I believe demonstrating positive energy by 25, maybe 26, will be also 10x faster. Not only has that happened, there's a dozen other credible projects in fusion that have been started, mostly because Commonwealth instigated this change towards fusion, and I have this theory you need instigators. And it's got sparked up a field that was slow and not attracting the best talent to attracting the best talent now. And there's probably a dozen startups, and that's what makes me optimistic. At least 1 or 2 or 3 will be successful in this.
How does fusion, how does geothermal, how does new energy resources and innovations within kind of their extraction, how does that rearrange international relations, do you think?
Well, if we can reduce our dependence on oil, we can dramatically reduce international tensions and what are called strategic interests. There's so much fighting over strategic resources like energy. The minerals and metals is the other area. We can eliminate that tension. Imagine the following. If you take every coal plant in the country and its boiler, the coal boiler or a natural gas boiler, is replaced every 5 to 10 years. They deteriorate pretty quickly. If you could replace it with a fusion boiler, you wouldn't have to build 5,000 new power plants in the US. You just have to build 5,000 new boilers, which is less than the number of Liberty ships we built in 5 years during the Second World War. So that's how you achieve these at scale and completely change industries and our source of power, by being clever about it.
I had Larry Summers on the show not too long ago, and he said specifically with regards to kind of energy and its impact on, international relations, that China is a prison, Japan is a nursing home, and Europe is a museum. Can I ask, do you agree with that statement? And how do you think about that with regards to the discussion we just had on how energy changes international power flows?
I think what Larry was probably talking about was demographics. Europe is an aging demographic. China and Japan are rapidly aging. I think if I read right, by 2040, which is 15 years, 17 years from now, the average age in Japan will be 54 or something like that. The world needs younger people to have a vibrant society, and what is called the dependency ratio, the number of people working to support each person not working, whether they're elders or kids. That dependency ratio in Japan, China, most of Europe is heading in the wrong direction. The US has a reasonable demographic. India has a great demographic. The Mideast and Africa have good demographics. But this anti-immigrant sentiment will hurt these European countries from really renovating, invigorating their societies. That's a complex problem.
Why are you so bullish on India moving forward? And will India develop into a tech giant, do you think, in the next 5 to 10 years?
What I love about India is the demographic is young, with a huge focus on learning and education. Now, India has pretty significant problems, I think. Leaving a population like the Muslim population behind in India would be a huge disaster and could completely change the optimistic projection I have for India if we leave a part of the population behind, and that becomes a source of violence, rioting, things we've seen. But generally, a well-educated population and a core set of technologists and English as a language, a common language, Western values, democracy as a value, all those make India a pretty good candidate, as does, Brazil's similar in many ways. So India is not the only country with that kind of advantage.
Do you think the US and the rest of the world will be increasingly reliant on Indian-born tech talent, given what you just mentioned there in terms of the amount of young people and their talent?
I think the great thing about technology is you need to develop it once and deploy it 100 times. You go discover an oil well, you run out of it, you can't build 1 million of those. If you build a bipedal robot, you can build 1 million of those. So yes, technology talent is going to be important to make the world a better place. I'm very optimistic about the role technology can play. Now, there's dangers to that too. But I'm very optimistic, whether it's in healthcare, we've talked about it, climate and energy, we've talked about that, music and media and content generation, lots of places. But the talent can be anywhere, and I think India will be an important source, or can be an important source with the right policy. Everything's subject to right politics and right policy in the country.
You mentioned music there and content. I have to ask about that. You've been a long supporter of kind of content creation by AI, specifically in music, for many years. And you tweeted before, music won't require personal musicians in 15 years, and your favorite artist will be a personal algorithm. Can you take me inside your mind here, Vinod, in terms of how you see the future of music with AI at the heart of it?
So we invested in this area also 5 years ago. And some founders from Australia came to me and said they wanted to build a top 10 music hit generated entirely by an AI. We're not there yet, but Splash.ai will let me be a rapper. In fact, I was able to sing a rap song at my daughter's wedding because of AI, and I'm a terrible singer and a terrible rapper. I do think the Taylor Swifts of the world will still be there. I'm not suggesting they will disappear. Artists and phenomena will be there. Their creativity will be dramatically enhanced by AI. It's like getting a much more powerful tool at their beck and call. They can try 100x more variants of things they like or don't like or want to guide the experience to. So a Taylor Swift will always be an experience. But The Splash AI is become one of the largest music games on Roblox, where every 13-year-old can also create their own music. And I think at some point, you might want music for your brain, the way your brain works and the music you like, for a quiet walk or when you want to get energized before an athletic event. And it'll be personalized to you and can be personalized. It may be an adaptation for something Grimes sang or something from the old days of Elvis, or it could be something brand new and completely original. I think people are very narrow-minded when it comes to imagining how music might be used and enhance people's lives with the help of AI. I think it'll be a powerful tool both for musicians and individuals, empowering them to do things that they couldn't. If I don't have the voice, doesn't mean I shouldn't be able to play that music.
How do you think about the challenge of verification with the ability to create content that can be very similar to others? Verification becomes the most important thing, making sure that it is authentic. How do you think about that and media rights in a world where content supply could really be infinite?
Look, that's a tricky problem. Funnily, anticipating this world, my wife runs a nonprofit called CK12.org. It's meant to design free content, open source content for everybody, and personal AI tutors for every student that are near free or free. And multiple years ago, we changed our open source license to include a prohibition against derivative works. So we looked ahead a few years and said our content will not allow for derivative work, including derivative algorithms that use the content to train on. So we were forward-looking. Now, the law in this area is not clear at all. So in Splash.ai, we've trained the music from scratch. There is no YouTube music or any artist's music used in training our AI. And it's completely IP-free of any artist. I'm excited about music models that don't rely on any IP from any other source. We authored our own loops and stems and voices and all that. And we will also license voices from artists. If Grimes is willing to license her voice, which she has, then it'll become a thing our users can use as they personalize their music with her voice. I think it'll dramatically enhance productivity and creativity, both in music, but also in content, in storytelling, in your brand logo, just almost everything.
Where do you think the real money to be made here is? Is it in the aggregator, your Spotify of the world? Is it in the rights holder, your Universal? Is it in that company that creates it, the creation tools? Where does value accrue in the future of music as you kind of described it there?
Look, in the end, human beings love originality. So where that originality comes from, a little hard to say. Will AI get more creative than your typical artist, or will artists be dramatically enhanced to have their creativity be amplified? Hard to say. But I think that's where value will accrue from. I'm not sure aggregation will be as important. It might be, but definitely at every part of the stack, from the silicon hardware that runs these things to aggregation and anything in between, there will be value creation.
If it's okay with you, Vinod, I'd love to move into a quick fire round. So I say a short statement and you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
That sounds fine.
So what single piece of content, very hard question, apologies for this, but what piece of content has had the most impact on you?
A few years ago, I went to a Taylor Swift concert, and the concert was great, and she's on a new tour. But standing there, watching the experience and the performance, I could think of 5 ways in which you could enhance that experience. For example, with the display behind her, where she was much larger than life, you could see fully holographic displays. You could see music enhancement in many ways. If I were to pick one thing, I would say on the entertainment side, that had a very large influence on me. In the AI field, seeing some of the early examples of, wow, that's now possible, even if it's not reliable yet, that was pivotal for me and got me convinced AI was at a stage of a Cambrian explosion. I remember vividly going to the MIT Plasma Fusion Lab with Bob Mumgart, the founder of Commonwealth Fusion, before Commonwealth Fusion existed. And he had me stand on a chamber and he said, below you was 600 million degrees a few seconds ago. Those kinds of moments are pivotal. And it inspires you to say, how can we make this even more pragmatic, more scalable, more real, more creative, the whole bit. Sorry, not a rapid-fire question, but...
Vinod, it's a joy to hear you describe it, so please do not worry. You mentioned Mark Andreessen at the beginning with that Saturday morning meeting. We see Mark Andreessen today, a larger-than-life figure. What was Mark like back in those early days when you backed him with Netscape?
You know, it's hard to remember 1996. I know it was Castro and El Camino in Mountain View. He was definitely intense. I remember coming out of the meeting, calling John Doerr and saying, let's just do this. Remember, the internet was this ambiguous thing. It was one of these triggering moments I call instigations for me. That's what he was like. It didn't take very long to decide we should be backing Mark and Netscape.
Tell me, how do you see the future of transport?
You know, so I have my favorite project. I believe, as an optimist, we can replace most cars in most cities in the next 25 years. As ridiculous as that sounds, I will only suggest the internet sounded ridiculous in its scope and impact in 1996. I think email sounded ridiculous in 1990. PCs in every home sounded ridiculous in 1985. Computer in your hand, the iPhone, sounded ridiculous in 2006. So we've gone through these moments. GPT sounded ridiculous 5 years ago. So I do believe we can replace most cars in most cities. We have a little startup called Glidewise, which uses self-driving the wrong way. I think the Waymo approach and the Cruise approach is nice. It adds functionality. It's not transformative of cities. Self-driving cars used in public transit will make public transit cheaper and faster and point-to-point and on demand. That's what we're building at Glidewise. We bid on 3 projects so far. None of them projects we were invited into. These were public transit bids, including the one connecting the San Jose airport to the new Google campus to the Apple campus. We bid, lobbed in a bill over the transom and won it outright. To build a public transit system, people would say, that's crazy for startups to do. But we won 3 bids now in a row. We haven't lost one yet. I'm sure we will lose something as a startup in public transit. And remember, these are 50-year revenue streams. Very, very long revenue sources if we can get there. Of course, that's always a risk. So I'm very excited about transforming the nature of cities, because the one thing fixed in cities is street width. Anything that allows much more throughput, more passengers per hour, per foot or meter of lane width is what's needed, because that's the one thing in cities that'll never change. And I think gradually we will go from Uber can't pick up and drop off on Market Street to cars can't drive on Market Street. Up and down is public transit, or one lane. We designed our public transit system to be bicycle lane width and have more throughput than light rail. That's exciting. I get very, very excited about that kind of an idea.
You've mentioned some of your incredible investments with Khosla before in this show. When you reflect on the ones that you haven't done, which one stands out to you as one you didn't do but wish you had done?
Oh, there is so many. I remember in 2007, a journalist asked me about Twitter, and they interviewed me and they sourced their questions on Twitter in 2007, I think.
Wow.
I think maybe in early 2007 at Davos or something. And I said, interesting, but couldn't see the potential of it. That was duh. My biggest mistake ever was I was at Sun, and Cisco routers were software running on Sun machines. And Sun's logo or tagline used to be, "The network is the computer." And I didn't see, and nobody at Sun saw routers as maybe a huge thing, even though we had adapted networking from day one. By the way, the first computer to have standard networking from day one. In fact, in 1982, we had hardware encryption on every computer because it was networked. Too early matters, I guess. Yeah, I made so many mistakes. I like to say I have made more mistakes than almost anybody I know. But I'd rather try and fail than fail to try, which is what most people have done.
That's exceptional. I love that. And I'm probably going to get killed for asking this from your team, but I have to anyway. People chase money, honestly, Vinod, most of the time in a lot of society. You've been incredibly successful. Does money make one happy?
All the research is very, very clear. Money helps up to a certain point in society and then is not hugely correlated to happiness. I do think passion for projects makes you happy. Passion for a vision, passion for an area, whether it's music or it's a scientific breakthrough, that I think makes people life meaningful and happy, and that's sort of what I strive for.
Vinod, I've loved this. I can't thank you enough for putting up with my questions. You've been incredible, so thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks very much. I very much enjoyed it.